I grew up in a family with a tradition of locking one girl in a soundproof basement to protect the rest of the family, but the truth was far darker. My family has always claimed that the local police would stand behind them no matter what. They never counted on investigators from several federal districts quietly building cases that stretched across 4 states. In our family, the men insisted that one girl from every generation live in a soundproof basement room, to serve as what they called the household safety valve. My grandfather designed the room in 1962 after growing up in a home where his father beat his mother unconscious and his brothers terrorized their wives. He decided his invention was a modern answer to domestic violence. At 16, one daughter would be chosen fitted with a locked silver anklet and confined to the basement around the clock. Whenever anyone felt angry, stressed, or simply cruel, they could go downstairs and vent on the designated target. Grandfather honestly believed that sacrificing one female relative spared the rest. 3 generations of men absorbed this teaching. My father, uncles, and older male cousins learned as boys that the basement girl existed for their anger. They accompanied their fathers, practiced strikes that did not leave obvious marks, then received their own keys once they reached adolescence. The women took part as well. My grandmother kept the records and led the selection ceremony. My mother prepared the anklet and meals. My aunts told the younger girls that the role was an honor that kept the family safe. Whenever I asked why no one called the police, they told bedtime stories about foster care horrors and warned that any girl who tried to report the secret would end up abandoned and victimized. When I was 8, my Aunt Sophia turned 16 and was escorted downstairs for the ceremony. I watched her parents hand their daughter over like a ritual offering. The rules were clear. The chosen girl served from her 16th birthday until she died or became too injured to continue. The replacement was selected immediately. My grandmother proudly showed me detailed ledgers listing every girl the years she served and notes on her performance as if she were managing a company roster. Sophia lasted until I turned 13. Then my cousin Elena was chosen. Each morning my uncle visited before work. Wednesdays were reserved for my father. Weekends belonged to my grandfather. The women visited too, though less often. All of the family's accumulated frustration funneled into that single room. Around that time, I realized the heating vents linked every part of the house. When the furnace kicked on, I could hear Elena begging. I began to listen during the scheduled visits. I heard my grandmother explaining to my 9-year-old cousin Nina that she might be blessed with selection one day. That was when I started gathering evidence. For 6 months, I hid a small recorder in the vents and stored the files on a flash drive. I recruited 8 younger cousins who did not want to be next. Nina crawled through the crawl space and mapped the ductwork. Vera taught herself to pick locks so we could drop medical supplies to Elena and photograph her injuries through the grates. The breaking point came at our Christmas dinner. After dessert, my grandmother rang the selection bell and announced that Elena had done her duty. She listed Elena's broken ribs and torn ligaments as proof of her service, then declared it was time for a replacement. Her eyes settled on 9-year-old Maya, who smiled proudly without understanding. I stood and pressed play on a hidden speaker. 6 months of recordings filled the room. Elena's sobs, my grandfather's voice during beatings, my grandmother praising the system. While relatives shouted and tried to yank cords from the wall, Vera dialed 911. The other girls formed a circle around me, while audio photographs and documents spilled onto the dining room projector. Police cars arrived quickly, but my family still could not accept that I had betrayed what they called the feminist solution. Even while officers led them away, they insisted the tradition prevented greater harm. My grandmother repeated that one sacrifice protected the many. They were so certain of their righteousness that they never imagined anyone in the bloodline would defy them. 17 relatives were arrested that night. I finally believed the nightmare was ending. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the arrests, our case reached the county courthouse. The prosecutor presented audio clips, photos of Elena's injuries, and decades of written logs. Judge Harrison leafed through the files with an unreadable face. When the prosecutor finished, Harrison closed the folder and said, "Case dismissed. Lack of jurisdiction." The gavel struck once. My jaw went numb. As the courtroom emptied, I noticed a thin scar on the judge's wrist, identical to the one my grandfather carried, a mark each man received after his first basement visit. Harrison gathered his papers while my father and uncles exchanged relieved smiles. Elena swayed in the witness chair, ignored by everyone except the bailiff, who hurried us toward the exit. Outside, reporters crowded around my family's lawyers. I heard phrases like false accusations and troubled youth. My relatives posed for photos. That evening, my aunt posted pictures of the victory dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. In one shot, Harrison lifted a champagne flute beside my grandfather. Both wore silver bracelets with our family crest. Elena collapsed in my bathroom that night. Paramedics said her blood pressure was dangerously high. On the way to the hospital, she whispered that they would punish her for speaking. I stayed beside her bed until sunrise. When I checked my phone, I had 23 missed calls. The first voicemail was steady breathing, the second a warning to keep family business private. The fifth said, "Some girls never learn." 2 days passed in a blur of hospital visits and locked doors. Elena refused food, convinced it was poisoned. Parents of the younger cousins began removing them from school. Vera's mother appeared at my apartment shouting that I had filled her child's head with lies. On the third morning, a package without a return address arrived. Inside were photocopied bank statements showing monthly transfers from my grandfather's company to Harrison Financial Consulting for 15 years. Beneath the statements sat photographs: the judge at my cousin's baptism wearing a silver bracelet, the judge at my grandfather's birthday, standing with the men who held basement keys, court documents dismissing 3 earlier cases against my family, all signed by Harrison. I drove to the district attorney's office. The receptionist smiled politely and said the DA was out of town on an extended family emergency. As she set the appointment book on her desk, her sleeve slipped back, revealing a delicate silver chain. I walked out, evidence clutched to my chest. In the parking lot, a security guard asked if I needed help. His tie clip bore our family crest. That evening, my apartment windows were smashed while I worked the night shift. Nothing was stolen, but a photo of Elena in her hospital bed lay on the coffee table taken from outside her window. Nina called in tears because her parents planned to send her to live with our grandparents for discipline. The line disconnected mid-plea. When I tried to call back, the number was dead. Within 48 hours, Vera's family relocated across state lines. Her last text read, "They are transferring Dad's job." No address given. One by one, every cousin who had helped me disappeared from the internet. My bank reported suspected fraud and froze every account I owned. My credit card declined an hour later. At work, anonymous complaints flooded management citing poor performance and attitude. My supervisor suspended me pending an investigation. Desperate, I contacted my college friend Melissa. Her father, Brian Miller, had spent 30 years as a private investigator before retirement. He let me into their house, poured coffee, and urged me to lay everything on the dining table. As he studied each page, his expression darkened. He retrieved old case files from his home office. Harrison's name appeared again and again, always dismissing charges against wealthy families whose properties contained hidden rooms or unexplained modifications. Brian reached out to former law enforcement contacts. Within a week, he uncovered 12 similar cases over 2 decades, all tossed by Harrison or judges tied to him. Every family had unusual wealth, young women who vanished from public life, and houses with reinforced basements. "We need survivors," Brian said. "Their voices are stronger than any paper trail." Through careful networking, he located 3. Sarah Chen, now 32, escaped her family at 19. Maria Santos, 28, once testified about a locked room in her uncle's house. Jennifer Wu, 41, tried to report her family at 16. We met in a cafe 2 towns away. Each woman scanned the room before sitting. Sarah described the discipline chamber in her childhood home. Maria showed faint scars on her ankles. Jennifer spread photographs of girls who never survived. She explained that the families shield one another through marriage and business deals, sealing loyalty with silver jewelry or branded scars. Their evidence, combined with ours, revealed 15 interconnected families across 4 states. Brian organized everything into a federal brief. Kidnapping, conspiracy, trafficking across state lines. Federal court could bypass the local network. The women signed detailed affidavits. Sarah's hand shook, yet she pressed hard enough to tear the page. Maria looked up and whispered, "At least someone will finally listen." We set a filing date for the federal courthouse. 2 weeks before our hearing, my grandmother appeared at Melissa's door. Brian answered, blocking her path. She offered a manila envelope marked Trust Fund $2 million for me if I withdrew. I stepped into view and declined. Her smile vanished. She hissed that the tradition would continue and that Nina's ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Fear knotted in my stomach. Nina was 9, already targeted. Brian urged caution, but that night I drove to my grandparents' house. I parked down the block and slipped into the cellar. The basement light glowed. Nina sat in the corner wearing a new silver anklet, eyes hollow. I knelt beside her, working the lockpicks Vera had taught me. Above us, footsteps gathered. The ceremony was starting early. I opened a live video on my phone and streamed while I freed the anklet. The basement door swung open. My father, uncles, and grandfather crowded the stairs. I held the phone high and shouted that thousands were watching. My uncle lunged. I dodged. Chaos erupted. Someone tried to grab the phone, Nina screamed. Sirens cut through the shouting. Brian's voice echoed from upstairs, followed by men identifying themselves as federal marshals. Agents in tactical gear surged into the basement, securing everyone without firing a shot. The lead marshal said the live stream provided urgent cause for entry. While agents cataloged restraints and photographed injuries, Nina clung to my arm. For the first time, I believed we might actually end this. The raid triggered a chain reaction. Marshals executed coordinated warrants against the remaining families. Judge Harrison was arrested after investigators found detailed payment ledgers in his safe. 3 other judges, 2 police chiefs, and several city officials followed. Each bore the silver symbol in some form. At the federal trial 6 months later, prosecutors unveiled the entire network. My grandfather, father, and uncles received sentences ranging from 20 years to life. My grandmother, who selected victims, received 40. Similar punishments fell on the other clans. Elena began trauma therapy and slowly rediscovered her own voice. Nina entered foster care with a family trained in complex PTSD. We video chat each week. She has started to smile again. I started a social work program focusing on family cult dynamics. A single photo sits on my desk. Nina and me outside the courthouse the day we testified, both free of silver chains. Letters still arrive from prisons. My relatives call me traitor and destroyer. I file every letter in a box labeled proof they never changed. Their tradition is gone. The rooms stand empty. The cycle is broken, and it will never begin again. The federal verdicts made headlines for a week, then the media cycle moved on to newer scandals, but the investigation continued. The family house where I had grown up was seized under asset forfeiture rules. Federal forensic teams spent nearly a month cataloging every inch. Behind a false wall in the sub-basement, they uncovered 8 sets of remains. The oldest dated to the late 1960s, the first generation of girls who never survived their service. Their parents had been told the daughters ran away. Letters had been forged to keep up the lie. News of the discovery rippled through the extended family tree like an earthquake. Distant cousins filed into the coroner's office to give DNA samples while detectives cross-checked missing person reports that had gathered dust for half a century. I attended each identification hearing even though I'd never met those women. Seeing their names restored to public record felt necessary. One afternoon, an agent placed a small box in my hands, a tarnished silver anklet, its clasp fused with age and rust. It belonged to Lillian Reyes, chosen in 1974, allegedly run away in 1976. She had been 17. I signed the evidence release form with hands that would not stop shaking. My mailbox began filling with handwritten letters soon after the trial. Most were from imprisoned relatives calling me a traitor, begging, cursing, bargaining. I opened a few, then stopped. Instead, I filed each envelope in a banker's box labeled "Proof of No Remorse" and slid it under my bed like an unofficial archive. What mattered more were the calls and emails from strangers who had watched the live stream. Women from other states described eerily similar traditions hidden behind respectable facades. Some asked how to gather evidence safely. Others searched for therapists who understood cult-style family abuse. I could not solve everyone's crisis, but I could share what Brian and I had learned: record everything, backup files in multiple locations, connect with a journalist you trust, aim for federal jurisdiction if local systems are compromised. Brian and I set up a secure website that cataloged public documents from our case indictments, sentencing memos, property blueprints, alongside a step-by-step guide for whistleblowers. Within 6 weeks, the site had thousands of visits. 3 other states opened investigations based on tips submitted through our encrypted portal. Meanwhile, I started my graduate practicum at a community mental health clinic. My supervisor specialized in intergenerational trauma. She looked at my application essay, 30 pages, explaining exactly why I was there, and said, "Use your story, but do not let it be the only story you know." I took that advice to heart. For every client session, I prepared twice as hard, determined not to let personal history blind me to someone else's pain. Nina's foster parents allowed weekly video calls. Each time she greeted me with something new: a drawing of a treehouse, a magic trick learned from her foster brother, a joke she could barely finish without giggling. The purple shadows under her eyes slowly faded. Still certain noises set her trembling shoes on wooden stairs, a key turning in any lock. Her therapist encouraged small victories. One evening, Nina showed me the silver anklet she had worn, now cut open and mounted in a shadow box. "It can't hurt me anymore," she said, and for a moment I could hardly speak. Elena's recovery was slower. Months of hospitalization shifted to an intensive outpatient program, then to a halfway home for trauma survivors. She vacillated between gratitude for freedom and crushing guilt for the girls who died before her. On good days, she joined our outreach video conferences, explaining the mechanics of survival in a locked room. On bad days, she refused to leave her small bedroom, convinced an unseen relative would appear to drag her back. One afternoon, I found a note slid under my office door. "No sender, just a line of neat printing. They will never forgive you." I filed it with the prison letters. Another week, someone keyed the side of Brian's sedan, carving the family crest into the paint. He left it unrepaired as a reminder of the stakes. 6 months after sentencing, federal agents dismantled the last physical symbol of the tradition, the ceremonial bell my grandmother had used to announce each selection. Officials planned to store it in evidence, but I argued for public display. Eventually, the bell landed in the State Museum's exhibit on hidden crimes. The plaque reads, "Used in a multi-state abuse ring." This bell marked the moment a child lost her freedom. Its sound ended when survivors brought the crime to light. I visited on opening day along with Sarah Maria and Jennifer, the first survivors Brian had found. We stood before the glass case in silence. A school field trip group filed past their teacher, explaining the dangers of blind tradition. I watched a middle school girl lean close to the bell, eyes wide, and felt a mix of sorrow and satisfaction. That child would never be tricked into thinking violence was protection. While the public moved on, the civil suits began. Hospitals sought reimbursement for unpaid medical bills, and survivors filed wrongful death claims. Frozen assets from the family's shared fund were divided among plaintiffs. I testified about bookkeeping codes used to hide monthly payoffs. Cross-examination was brutal. Defense attorneys tried to paint me as an attention seeker profiting from tragedy. My answer never changed. I would give back every dollar, every headline, if those rooms had never existed. By late winter, my frozen bank accounts were restored, yet money felt contaminated. I donated a large portion to a legal aid group that now represented several new whistleblowers. Each donation letter specified that funds must cover protective relocation therapy and college tuition for survivors under 18. Brian's health began to falter. Decades of stress had worn on him. Still, he refused to step back from the cause. One snowy evening, he handed me his case notebook. "You can carry it from here," he said. "Build something that outlives both of us." I promised I would. Spring brought unexpected closure. Federal archivists invited me to review newly unsealed documents from Judge Harrison's house. Among them was a handwritten ledger listing initiation scars, silver jewelry gifts, and secret payments dating back 30 years. The final page recorded my grandmother's visit to Harrison 2 weeks before the county trial, the exact date he dismissed our case. Next to it, she had written, "Assurance secured." Seeing her handwriting beside that phrase felt like looking into an abyss where love should have been. I photocopied the page for my records, then signed off on its inclusion in the public archive. Nothing about my grandmother would remain hidden behind family business again. The last task was reclaiming my own name. During the criminal proceedings, I had been identified only by initials to protect my privacy. Now I filed a motion to attach my full name to the public docket. Reporters called nonstop asking why. I told them secrecy helped the abusers. Visibility protects the next girl who is told her suffering is a family duty. My statement ran in several national outlets. My relatives believed silence could turn crime into tradition. Speaking breaks that spell. I am not brave because I survived. I am brave because I refuse to stay silent. I pinned the article above my study desk next to the photo of Nina and me on courthouse steps. Each morning, it reminds me why I chose this path and why I cannot rest yet. Part 4 will describe how the Survivor Network expanded, how new cases toppled the remaining pillars of the old order, and how I finally learned to live beyond the shadow of the basement. The spring that followed my name reveal felt like a second trial. Only this time, the world watched. Survivors from across the country sent messages through our secure site describing cellars, attics, even barns that served the same purpose as my family's basement. Brian's notebook became a living document. Each new testimony connected another family, another official, another hidden door. By midsummer, the Department of Justice announced a joint task force on multi-generational confinement crimes. They asked Brian to consult by video because of his health and invited me to serve as a liaison for survivor outreach. My graduate program allowed independent study credit, so every Wednesday I took a train to the federal building carrying files in a locked briefcase and a notebook filled with careful pseudonyms. The agents sometimes looked startled that the person coordinating witness statements was still in her 20s, but the hesitation faded when they heard the precision in my summaries. One of the first new raids happened in Missouri. A girl named Leah had hidden a spare phone behind a loose brick and messaged our site at 3 in the morning. 2 days later, marshals broke through a cellar trap door and carried her out. She spent her first night of freedom on a cot in a safe house, clutching a teddy bear someone had donated. The next afternoon, she asked for a coloring book, and the volunteer handed her one from a box labeled Nina's Wish List. Nina had organized a donation drive through her foster family's church and included a note in every package, "You are not alone." Leah's case cracked open another county network, leading to 9 arrests and the suspension of a family court judge who wore a silver lapel pin. The survivor network grew too large for Brian's dining room table, so we moved operations to a donated office suite above a bookstore. We called it the Lantern Center, inspired by the single bulb that had once hung over the basement bunk. Survivors and volunteers painted the walls bright yellow, assembled second-hand desks, and pinned a national map with colored tags marking every closed room. When a new victim was rescued, we replaced the red tag with a green one. By the end of the year, nearly half the map showed green. My days filled with grant applications, court depositions, and late-night calls to shelters arranging emergency beds. Some mornings, I woke shaking, the old vent sounds replaying in my head, but therapy taught me to ground myself. Warm mug, steady breath, the bracelet on my wrist that now bears the lantern symbol instead of the family crest. I kept the tarnished anklet from Lillian Reyes locked in a display case at the center. It reminded staff and visitors why we worked, but it also assured me that history could be captured instead of repeated. Elena's progress was slower, but steady. She completed an art therapy program and used her settlement funds to rent a small studio apartment. On my birthday, she mailed a charcoal sketch of the basement door splintering open. The hinges in the drawing bent outward, as if the room itself rejected its purpose. She titled it Exit Wound. The State Museum requested to include it in the Hidden Crimes exhibit alongside the bell. Elena said yes, provided the plaque listed her full name. She wanted at least one place in the world where the record showed she had survived. Nina thrived in school, discovered a love for robotics, and insisted on testifying before the state legislature when they debated a bill requiring annual wellness checks for homeschooled children. She stood at the podium with a silver chain melted into a paperweight on the table beside her and said, "I was almost invisible." A small inspection could have saved years of pain. The bill passed with overwhelming support. 2 appeals courts rejected petitions from my relatives. The opinions cited overwhelming evidence, community danger, and lack of remorse. Each denial felt like a door clicking shut behind me. I still received letters now tinged with self-pity rather than rage. I filed them unread. That autumn, the Lantern Center hosted its first remembrance ceremony for the 8 women found behind my grandfather's wall. We invited genealogists to track remaining relatives and secured funding to re-enter the remains under their proper names. A simple stone marker lists the 8 and leaves space for any future identifications. Nina chose the inscription, "Your stories are heard." Elena placed white roses at the base, then stepped back into the circle of survivors, who linked hands as the sun set. I completed my social work degree the following spring and accepted a full-time position with the federal task force, combining field interviews with policy research. During orientation, an analyst asked why I thought the networks had flourished so long. I answered silence looks a lot like consent to anyone who benefits from it. Our job is to ensure silence loses its power. The family estate, now government property, was cleared and seeded with wildflowers. Local schools bring students for field lessons on civic courage. At the edge of the meadow stands a small metal plaque explaining the site's history and crediting the investigation that ended it. No names, only this statement: tradition is never an excuse for cruelty. Courage is the decision to speak. I visit when I can. I walk the path that covers the old foundation and listen to the wind move through tall grass where concrete once trapped screams. Each gust feels like another voice restored to open air. The map in the Lantern Center still shows a few red tags, stubborn holdouts hiding behind money or remote farmland. We keep working. Every new survivor who steps into sunlight adds another name to our roster of witnesses. They bring diaries, Bruised photographs, sometimes only half-remembered floor plans, sketched on napkins. We turn each fragment into a pathway for marshals and prosecutors. I no longer flinch when a key turns in a lock. I still wake from dreams of footsteps on stairs, but now there is a second sound, woven in a door, slamming open agents, calling out a child's stunned inhale of fresh air. On those mornings, I brew a cup of coffee, sit beneath a window that faces east, and watch light gather. The sun finds every corner eventually, even rooms that were built to stay dark. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.